Okay, I will not keep you waiting. The other speakers will join us later. I would like to begin our session. Welcome, all of you. And as I mentioned, our session today is on building Beirut back better, how the private sector can support response and recovery. As you know, the August 4th port explosions in Beirut came as Lebanon faces a multifaceted crisis. In recent months, increased COVID-19 transmissions, unprecedented economic crisis, poverty, currency devaluation, among other social and economic repercussions, have made 2020 a disastrous year in Lebanon. These explosions created significant and immediate humanitarian needs that will yield severe long-term consequences for our country. Why rebuilding Beirut back better matters? The explosions shook our city like an earthquake, ravaging a big part of the city. Here are few shocking statistics to note. Almost 200 people lost their lives and 6,500 were injured. 15,000 households were ruined and over 3,000 businesses damaged. 300,000 people are displaced with no shelter and in severe need of basic human necessities. Now, as the city and country move to rethink, rebuild, and reconnect its communities, we at the UN Global Compact's local network in Lebanon are committed to supporting partners and working with the private sector to foster this change. In today's session, we will explore how the private sector can support the government, UN system, civil society, and others in responding to recovering from this multiple crisis. We will focus on the role of the public-private partnerships and principal business operations in strengthening national capabilities and building resilient communities and businesses. Today we have a wonderful line of speakers, but very limited time. We may not have time for the Q&A of the audience. I encourage participants to engage in the conversation through the chat function. Please, you can share your experiences, ask questions in writing. Allow me first to welcome Ms. Najat Rushdi, the UN Resident and Humanitarian Coordination for Lebanon, to give opening remarks. Dr. Rushdi brings over 20 years of experience in development and humanitarian assistance and international coordination in conflict and post-conflict areas. She arrived to Beirut on the 1st of August, only 3 days before the blast. We are very happy to have you with us today, Dr. Rushdi. Dr. Rushdi, could you please provide an overview on the current Lebanese situations? What are the main challenges and what opportunities can arise for the private sector engagement? Dr. Rushdi, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Dina, and good morning to everybody. It's a real honor for me to join you for this large virtual Global Compact Forum, which looks like to be a new normal for all of us, you know, to go virtual instead of face-to-face. But it's good to see the faces of everybody, you know, the speakers on the screen too. An event, actually, that is particularly important during these difficult times in Lebanon. So thank you very much for the opportunity to speak. Over 1 month after the devastating explosions at Beirut port, this country is striving to find a way to emerge from a tragedy that has touched every single person in Lebanon, including the large diaspora. This has occurred at a time when Lebanon was already reeling from civil unrest, economic and financial hardship, increasing poverty and unemployment, compounded by political tensions and soaring number of COVID-19 cases. The very night of the explosion, the UN and humanitarian actors sprang into immediate action to save lives. However, Lebanon needs support that goes beyond the scope of emergency response and appeals. Together with the European Union and the World Bank, United Nations, we have delivered a rapid damage and needs assessment in a record time to help support an evidence-based recovery planning based on a Building Back Better approach. This approach guides the 3RF reform, recovery, and reconstruction framework that is in the making and which prioritizes the needs of the people, particularly the poor and the most vulnerable, reform and lay the groundwork for a much needed social contract. Ladies and gentlemen, as Lebanon continues to struggle against these unprecedented simultaneous shocks, a new social contract appears to be the country's path for transformation beside the political pact. All people want their fundamental rights and freedoms to be respected. They want a say in decisions that affect their lives. They want and are ready to become the agents of change the country needs to recover. Creating a new social pact in Lebanon will provide a binding force of mutual rights and duties between the Lebanese institutions and the Lebanese society at large, where accountability and citizenship are at the heart of this mutual commitment, where the executive aim for the common good, the legislative aim to protect the citizen and their rights, and where the judiciary system is impartial and independent, and where they all commit to transparency and accountability. Without a social contract agreed between the institutions and the citizen, actions on the economic and fiscal fronts alone will remain insufficient, and a profound crisis of legitimacy will continue to drive more people to streets, reversing years of progress on many development goals. This new social contract will give the people, especially those who have taken to the streets or who feel marginalized, the opportunity to rethink and shape Lebanon's future and to feel that their concerns and needs are addressed. It will help re-establish trust in the political system and national institutions and break the vicious circle of corruption. Women's and youth equal leadership and full participation in the reform, reconstruction, and recovery process are particularly crucial in this realm. We need women's and youth voices, presence, and contributions at the forefront of that social contract to ensure power is equitably redistributed and help create a better Lebanon, where all citizens have equal rights and equal representation in public and private policymaking, as clearly stated in the Constitution. For the private sector, a new social contract will help to create for businesses, especially small and medium enterprises, a fair chance to secure projects via a reformed and fair public procurement process, to have investment and support to help develop their sectors and facilitate exports, to be able to open centers of production outside of Beirut, and to be able to retain the highly skilled and educated Lebanese workers. In one word, to be sustainable. The private sector must be a great enabler to this endeavor. An important component of this new social contract is a national social protection program between the government, the institutions, the citizen, the civil society, and critically, the private sector that will ensure that social protection policies are well integrated in public policy and fully endorsed and implemented by the private sector based on equal rights and opportunities for all. In a country that possesses one of the most dynamic and vibrant private sector in the MENA region, and I can also say worldwide, the value that businesses can bring to the reform, recovery, reconstruction, and development trajectory in Lebanon is immense. They also have a great potential to play a more active role in achieving the 2030 agenda by ensuring inclusive and sustainable growth through their operations. All the more the complementarities existing between the roles of the government, civil society, and the private sector are well recognized to ensure employees' protection. For example, as you all know, during the 19th century, some industrial employers in Europe implemented social protection programs for their workers, which contributed to the development of the national social protection systems. The social benefits provided by employers boosted their ability to attract and retain the workforce, and improved labor productivity, fostered stronger employee commitment to the success of the business, and thus created more wealth for all. Similarly, in Lebanon, the private sector can set an example by ensuring decent work conditions for their employees, including health coverage, gender equality, safe working conditions, environmentally friendly operations, and transparent and accountable way of doing business. In return, they will experience even greater productivity, commitment, and sustainability. United Nations has been a committed development partner to Lebanon since ever by supporting its productive sectors for economic opportunities and job creation. This is particularly relevant to small and medium enterprises that form actually the backbone of the Lebanese economy and are major contributors to supply chains of large companies. Ladies and gentlemen, at this pivotal moment, with COVID-19 still spreading, social tensions and civil unrest rising, and the cry for social justice and human dignity ever more urgent, we have a huge responsibility to attenuate the pains of the people we serve, to respond to their needs, concerns, fears, and more importantly, to preserve their hopes. The UN is moving forward on that front, but we cannot do it alone. We need every support, everyone, and contribution of the private sector. We need your sustained and strong will to ensure a long-lasting recovery and reform process through innovative and new financial instruments and a constructive way of doing business, one based on equality and fairness of opportunity, on transparency and accountability, which will be worthwhile investments in the stability and prosperity of Lebanon. Just as importantly, by embedding human rights into your work, respecting the 10 principles of the UN Global Compact, and contributing to the shaping and implementing of a national social protection program, you can lead, and you will lead, not only an economic, but a social transformation, and in so doing, contribute to a speedy recovery for Lebanon, where no one is left behind, and a sustainable one. You have never been short of innovative ideas and incredible dynamism, not only in Lebanon, but around the world. When one asks about Lebanese, the first quality that comes up is entrepreneurship. Indeed, you are entrepreneurs. And the UN Global Compact Network provides you with an excellent entry point to tap into rich resources for sustainable business solutions and ideas to address Lebanon's unfolding challenges and reverse the trend of brain drain, gaining and retaining the wonderful youth and human capital the country has, and avoiding the total collapse of the middle class in the country. So, ladies and gentlemen, my call today is very clear. To the Lebanese private sector and to the international community, please invest in Lebanese people. Retain the Lebanese capacity in the country. Reverse the brain drain and gain this unique energy, unique innovation, creativity, and entrepreneurship that characterize every single young Lebanese. Support them, and you will get the best return on investment ever. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Rushdi, for your invaluable insights and clear vision on how we can collaborate and join forces to building back Beirut and helping the Lebanese community rise up again. Thank you so much. Hello, Dr. Dina. I need to ask all the panelists to mute their, microphones, please. Hello, Mr. Namasrin, all our speakers. Now, I would like to turn to our esteemed panelists who will further discuss the private sector contributions to response and recovery efforts in Lebanon. We have Mr. Ole Lund Hansen, Chief Global Operations, UN Global Compact, Mr. Sebastian Rhodes Stampa, Chief Emergency Response Section, United Nations Office for the Coordination of Humanitarian Affairs, OCHA, and the Operations Management Committee of the OCHA UNDP-led Connecting Business Initiative, CBR, Mr. Namat Frame, Chairman and CEO, Indefco SAL. For your knowledge, Indefco is a Lebanese multinational group of manufacturing companies that produce paper and plastic, raw materials and packaging, renewable energy solutions, converting machineries, and all CNC machine parts. Indefco employs over 10,000 people. Welcome, Mr. Ramsey. And Ms. Maisa Abu Adal Ghani, board member, Holdal Abu Adal Group. Holdal is a third-generation family business in Lebanon, working in retail, distribution, manufacturing, and beauty, personnel, healthcare, lifestyle, and luxury brands. Welcome on board. Last, we have with us Professor in Management and Sustainability, President Global Compact Network, Lebanon. My first question is to you, Ole. UN Global Compact is the largest corporate sustainability initiative in the world, representing over 13,000 companies. How does the UN Global Compact see the role of the private sector in humanitarian emergencies? And how can Global Compact local networks effectively mobilize the private sector to support response and recovery efforts? Please, I would like each one of you to have, the intervention limited to 3 minutes maximum. Thank you.
Okay, well, thank you so much, Dina, and it's great to be part of this wonderful panel. I'll try to limit to the 3 minutes indeed, even if it's a big and very important question. Also, thank you so much to the resident coordinator for that important overview of the situation in Lebanon. For your vision for the country, and indeed, I like very much your words about the social contract and how it importantly also involves the private sector. So that's, of course, what the UN Global Compact is all about, the private sector. And I see and we see, very clear role for the private sector to play in almost any humanitarian crisis. Indeed, also the one coming from the explosions in Beirut, but also the ones that you mentioned earlier that are indeed happening in parallel, both in your country, but also globally speaking. I think it's important to highlight, of course, how business can play a very crucial role, literally in all of the different phases of an unfolding humanitarian crisis. Of course, there's the immediate short-term response where companies fortunately do and indeed can play a very significant role in supporting the relief efforts and coordinating and collaborating with governments, with the UN, with civil society. When it's time for the recovery phase to really kick in, indeed, the role of business becomes only more significant in terms of helping societies recover financially, but also in terms of recovering from the ground that also in this case clearly has been lost in terms of development and sustainable development, basically across the board. And then finally, of course, in the longer term, when it's about building back better, as we're talking about here for Beirut, but we're also the UN Secretary General talking about that, from building back better from the pandemic, indeed. And here business have a huge role to play, of course, in advancing sustainable development through their core business, making sure that the societies, the communities within which they operate become more inclusive, more sustainable, and in so becoming also become much more resilient for future crises to maybe hit with lower probability, but at least for such crises to have less of an impact, especially on vulnerable groups. Specifically for the very sad unfoldings in Beirut after the explosions, there has been encouraging stories told and examples shared in terms of the role that business has played immediately. Of course, there are contributions that are in such a situation, financial contributions, very important to those leading the relief effort. But it's also great to see how companies very quickly, or some companies at least very quickly, responded in many other ways, really leveraging their staff resources, their competences, their infrastructure, their technologies. Some of the examples I've been hearing about, hopefully on this in this session we'll hear about even others, are about Lebanese companies mobilizing their employees to volunteer for cleaning the damaged areas, distributing food and water. We heard about hotels opening up rooms for displaced people, rental car companies offering cars for transportation, and different kinds of very necessary services in that immediate aftermath. We heard about even companies also contributing with free fuel, supporting with generators. So many different examples that I think each and every one are very encouraging. Speaking here on behalf of the UN Global Compact, we cannot emphasize, and I think that aligns also very much with what we heard Dr. Rochi talk about before, the need for companies, even in the immediate aftermath, to respond in a very responsible manner. And we believe the 10 principles, of course, of the UN Global Compact are also very critically important in a situation like this. So really, as a business, of course, responding, but also make sure to respond as responsibly as the situation demands. So thinking, for example, of the human rights principles that the Global Compact is founded on and that many companies are committed to, this means, for example, making sure that every initiative that a company is taking, every opportunity that's offered in such a time of crisis is available to people without discrimination of any kind. It also means in a situation like this where we know people who are already suffering from the lack of sufficient progress on sustainable development, they're obviously disproportionately hit by a crisis like this. So for companies adhering to the 10 principles, respecting human rights in a situation like this also means giving special attention to the suffering of vulnerable individuals and vulnerable communities. So yeah, we're doing our best in a situation like this to use our platforms to raise awareness among the 13,000 companies that we have of the role that companies can play in responding to a crisis like this one, to talk about the very important connection that exists between humanitarian priorities, disaster management, and the Sustainable Development Goals. And we, for example, collaborate with OCHA and the Connecting Business Initiative, not just on this session here, but really on providing guidance for companies on how they respond. And in this particular situation, we were very happy to also put out some guidance together with our network and those two same partners on how businesses could support the relief efforts.
Thank you so much for also your interventions. And building on what Mr. Hansen said, Mr. Rodis-Stampa, how can the humanitarian and the development coordination systems principled and accountable disaster response and recovery in Lebanon? Please, the floor is yours, Mr. Stampa.
Thank you very much indeed. That's a wonderful question. And thanks also to all the speakers and all of you attending. It's a great honor and a privilege to be here. Perhaps building on Najat and Ola's comments, it is very clear that the private sector is an indispensable partner in response and in development, yet one that has been far too often overlooked. With their on-the-ground networks, expertise, and ability to swiftly adapt and innovate, companies clearly play an integral role in ensuring that lives and assets are saved and that nations can recover from shocks more broadly in the longer term. As key stakeholders of the local response, as well as the humanitarian development nexus, businesses, and particularly private sector networks, can support transformative humanitarian action, enabling countries and communities to better prepare for, respond to, and recover from crises, and indeed become more resilient to shocks. I would have to observe, however, that unfortunately we're still far from having the private sector systematically included into disaster management systems, something which I consider absolutely critical, particularly in the current pandemic environment, if we are to fully leverage their expertise and experience in sudden onset and other types of disasters, and indeed the current pandemic. So how can humanitarian and development coordination systems support the private sector's contribution to principled and accountable disaster response and recovery? And how could we ensure that the private sector's perspectives are included in humanitarian and development discussions, and that their views are considered and contributions recognized? And I'd like to highlight just 3 important areas for you today. Firstly, the private sector, particularly networks, should be considered as an equal partner of choice. Humanitarian and development actors need to invest more in engaging private sector entities, establishing solid communication channels, building mutual understanding of working modalities, and exploring concrete ways to collaborate and leverage each other's expertise, and finding effective ways to assist affected populations. This also implies having honest discussions on the challenges of public-private partnerships, the importance of respecting and committing to key standards, principles, and agendas, such as the humanitarian principles, such as accountability to affected populations, and the SDGs, to name but a few, which are the cornerstone of humanitarian and development action. Secondly, we have seen that the establishment of private sector platforms that coordinate business contributions to disaster management and development planning facilitate linkages between private sector and humanitarian and development coordination systems. In fact, we have some very good examples that could be replicated in Lebanon. In Haiti and the Philippines, we have the OCHA UNDP Connecting Business Initiative, and they support business networks in both of those countries. And the private sector has a seat in the humanitarian country teams in both of those countries. In Madagascar, the CBI network is working closely with the National Risk and Disaster Management Office, ministries, municipalities, and UN entities to share information, raise awareness, and channel private sector contributions to COVID-19. So all examples of where this is a really valuable contribution. Finally, I would like humanitarian and development organizations, including to the UN, to further explore flexible funding that would allow the private sector to play a more strategic role in disaster management. We have some examples of this just this year. Earlier on, we had the CPI network in Vanuatu, the Vanuatu Business Resilience Council, responding to the Cyclone Harold, when there were very few international aid organizations and non-essential diplomatic staff had left the country because of the pandemic. The VBRC was one of the first responders. So the good news is we don't have to reinvent the wheel, we just have to improve on what's there and learn from across geographies. I'll finish off now because I'm slightly over. In the aftermath of the Beirut port explosions, I'm really pleased to see, beyond the release of the UN Business Guide, which earlier mentioned, key stakeholders are building synergies between the private sector contributions and activities implemented under the Flash Appeal in an effort to support a localized approach that links humanitarian and development responses. And I'm looking forward to seeing this partnership develop and potentially lead to more formalized coordination, an integrated approach, and effective communication sharing between the private sector and humanitarian and development actors. And apologies for going slightly over time.
We are looking forward to collaborate together, and thank you so much for your valuable recommendations that we have to take into consideration. And now I would like to hear from our business representatives, Ms. Abu Adal and Mr. Frame. Today, both of you are representing the voice of the Lebanese private sector. You have deployed since day one all your resources and capabilities on the ground in response to the blast. I would therefore ask you to share with us your insight and experiences on addressing the 10 principles and the Sustainable Development Goals, while also contributing to response and recovery efforts. And I would like to ask Mr. Frame to start, please. Thank you. Can you hear us?
Yes, can you hear me?
Yes, now we can hear you. Welcome.
Thank you,
yes,
first of all, thank you very
yours.
much. Yeah, thank you. Thank you, dear Dina. Thank you very much for being on this panel. And I am impressed with the speakers. Thank you for the insights you gave us all, especially Dr. Najat. I felt that you are becoming a real connoisseur of Lebanon particular pandemic, which is different than all kinds of other pandemics. And it is our malfunction in our operating system, which is a durable problem, structural problem, that definitely is emanating from the deficiency in a social contract and the national contract. So addressing this issue is the start of rebuilding a new Lebanon, which we are, to say the least, we are between two Lebanons now, between the old one and the new one. We are in a very desolated and empty desert. This is what we are feeling, a lot of pain. Suffering is at extreme, and the worst of the worst is that hope to be working on very quickly. If you ask me, a single most important thing that we should do now immediately is put a small light at the end of the tunnel, because there is no light. And I particularly, MP Dima Jamali,
yes,
we did both decided to resign, and I resigned at the end from the parliament because I felt that this is the end of a system and the genesis of a new one. Anyway.
That's why today you are having you at the private sector, because they have an added value.
Thank you very much. This is the idea. Back to my roots and my bases. I tell you one thing. We were very fast, as we have been always in the private sector in Lebanon throughout the war. You remember that the private sector in Lebanon is extremely vibrant and maybe 100 times more productive than the public sector. And this is one of the problems that, and probably one of the drivers that made people like us that comes from the private sector try to go to the public sector to model it, to change it, to bring with us the best practices. We think that it's very hard and we need to work in a different way. Anyway, the private sector in Lebanon is very productive in the wartime, and after the war, we had to substitute for all kinds of public services, from the power supply to the sewage system, to the social security, to the training and development, to all kinds of research. And this is where, you know, every disease that do not kill you makes you stronger. This is why we were very well prepared to take shocks. This is why in the pandemic, which is shock in the corona pandemic, private sector in Lebanon was exceptionally vibrant. You know that Lebanon is the only Middle Eastern country, and the wide Middle Eastern country, that developed its own ventilator, ICU ventilators being sold all around the world.
True.
And this is after 4 months of the pandemic, one of the very high-level ventilators. We were able to provide our own PPEs and saturate the markets. Masks were developed and being from a net importer to net exporter in 3 months, converting baby diaper machines into mask making machines. So all of these things were fast response systems. Last but not least, the way we behaved in this disaster. First of all, we have to understand that it was very easy to be doing a lot of things, because the public sector was inexistent after the shock.
Yes.
Really inexistent. Like for 20 days, we were on our own. NGOs and private companies. NGOs and private companies. And I think here that we should talk, since we are talking on a platform of the United Nations, we should start to think of a new partnership. The private sector and the NGOs.
And the NGOs.
Their own, not the public and private sector. And this is a completely new paradigm, I would say. And we have to think of this kind of a new dynamics in this respect. We have seen it on the ground. We are experimenting with it on the ground now. We are rebuilding houses. For instance, I don't want to talk about it. It's not the time to advertise our own companies.
Yeah. Anyway, we'll share with Maisa also your what they did also during in response and recovery in Beirut. Please, Maisa, also can you share with us your experiences briefly?
First of all, very quickly, I just wanted to thank Dr. Rushdi for summarizing with so much lucidity for all of us, for Lebanon, the pain points with so much consciousness. It was really impressive. I was trying to control myself because we are all shaken up by this multiple shocks, and especially after the Beirut tragedy. I wanted to thank Ole and Sebastian also for voicing out several solutions that we are all going through in the think tank, in the mindset. So we realize that no matter where we are, we're all more or less thinking of the same pain points, the same solution, but look at the power of this platform when we can get together and really put ourselves in the shoes of the multiple stakeholders in this ecosystem, because we are all change agents. And finally, Mr. Frame, that I'm meeting today, Indefco is a very big company for us, for Holdal. Holdal, we don't know if it's a medium-sized company, but it is a third-generation family business, sticking to its purpose, to its core values. So going back to the question, Dina, our family had already... It's a small but consistent company, but it's relatively small in the small companies. But we're really very consistent with whatever we've been trying to offer to our community for over 7 decades. So going back to the question, our family had already taken many initiatives to weather the storm back in October 2019, and before this tragedy occurred. Now, to sustain our efforts, what we did, besides our ongoing commitment to the SDG, to our SDG agenda, is that we really invested a huge amount of time on SDG 17, Partnership for the Goals, focusing on relief, rehabilitation, and reconstruction. So with all the obstacles we've had to overcome throughout the years, we could not afford to spread too thin. So if we wanted to succeed in these initiatives and we wanted to ensure sustainability, we need to focus a lot on Partnership for the Goals. We worked on 3 levels. So for the colleagues of Holdal, for the local business partners, and also for the community at large. So quick examples internally for the colleagues. So despite the huge losses incurred since October, because we are a Lebanese-based company and it's really it's our market, we ensured continued employment for everyone. We continued our recruitment of new talent. We set up a solidarity fund to support the huge inflation. We assisted in rebuilding 60 homes devastated by the blast. We increased our funding to scholarship because we've had this fund year after year, but we know this year it's actually going to be incremental, just to ensure the education continuity of all our colleagues' children. And we provided, of course, ongoing medical, social, and well-being support. For the business partners locally, we followed the same approach and the same plan because they are part of the enabling solution of our ecosystem. So we cannot look just at one part of the value chain. We need to look at the entire value chain creation. And finally, for the community at large, to support the families affected by the blast, we reached out to all our global partners. It's actually the first time we asked for help to the international community because we knew we could not sustain the effort alone. And they responded generously to our call for help. So we decided to match their contribution to NGOs, to the Lebanese civil society, and to the hospitals, on top of the in-kind donation in medical, in food, in et cetera. We mobilized 50 of our colleagues to support as volunteers during their working hour, because for us it was completely normal. It was our duty. We set up a solidarity fund across our digital platforms and stores. But now we are now capitalizing on the local network with SMEs and the social enterprises in our industries to better map the needs, to really go through the opacity, understand the needs, and ensure the most efficient support to the community. We intend to build strong coalition to bring together all the core competencies, to look at synergies, to better channel the efforts from beneficiaries, because we need to make sure we own and understand the data and we channel these efforts. So Holdan joined the UNGC in 2018, but in reality, the principles, the 10 principles have been an intrinsic part of our group for the past 7 decades. So it's just been consistency, working with the support of all stakeholders.
Yeah, we are so proud to hear the responsible voice of the private, Lebanese sector. Thank you so much for your insights. But I want to welcome, last but not least, Dr. Dima Jamali, and she's the president of Global Compact Network Lebanon. Dima, since October 2019, the Global Compact Network Lebanon has leveraged its platform and the private sector in support of our community. And lately, especially 2019, GCNL tackled for alleviating poverty and hunger. Today, the challenge is even harder. What is the network's plan to support Beirut response and recovery? Dima, can you hear us? Hello? We cannot hear you. You have to unmute yourself, please. Dima, we cannot hear you. Can you unmute your microphone? Okay, I think Dr. Jamali is having some technical, problems. Until we have her back on with us and we solve it, we would like really, in a quick comment from each one of you, starting with Dr. Najat, Ole, Sebastian. I would like to have, what is your, I would call you call to action for the government, UN, civil society, and the private sector to work together going forward? And, really a quick comment, like a wrap up.
Well, a quick comment will be to put the needs of the people at the center. I think if the people are recovering, this is the best bet and the best investment for the country to recover. Over.
Excellent. Ole?
Yeah, I would just say we've been, looking at the we've been so proud, right, of the network and the role you've been able to play with, collaboration and support of the UN system and so many other players. And I guess my key point would be, as other speakers have expressed as well, this should only be the beginning of mobilizing the private sector in a much more significant way. When we look long term, building sustainable, inclusive, and therefore also more resilient communities and societies, also in Lebanon, requires the private sector to, I guess, become more responsible, make sure they're not part of the problem, align with the 10 principles, but then also take an active role where there are opportunities to really contribute very actively.
Yeah.
So I think that's what the compact is all about, and I hope this is really a new beginning also in terms of mobilizing many more businesses to become responsible and part of that rebuilding in a much stronger way.
Sebastian?
Yeah, I'd simply say that it's deeply humbling, but hugely encouraging to hear people like Nimat and Maisa speak. We need to work together. We need to share information. We need to align on common priorities, but we don't just need collaboration. We need champions from across all of the sectors to work through the challenges, maintain a clear focus on the common goal, and to get where we need to go, which is to serve the people of Lebanon. And I think I may be looking at some of those champions on this screen.
Okay. Nimat, please, your one sentence call to action.
First, we should think of people at the center, as Dr. Najat said. By the way, people first was my motto in the election, just to tell you. So I'm not inventing anything now. So we have to work very hard to fill a huge void in Lebanon as private sector.
Thank you so much, Maisa.
So I totally agree. I will not repeat with what Dr. Najat and Sebastian and Nimat said, but I want to push it a bit further. It's not only about building back Beirut, it's truly about building together a new Lebanon that can provide the Lebanese generations to come with the right opportunities. And it does take a new social contract. It does take also an open and transparent and enabling ecosystem that ensures an integrated approach, and also the use of our most precious asset today is the educated Lebanese talent. So I totally agree with you, and I think it's time for a change management fundamental process where the people are part of the national solution.
Thank you. Unfortunately, the intervention of Dr. Jamali is going to be missed because she had some technical problems. But allow me, on behalf of herself and the Global Compact Network Lebanon, to share with you the initiative of GCNL, which is, we launched it after Beirut Blast. It's called Beirut Relief Initiative, where we are tackling exactly the SMEs. Because for us, SMEs, they are the backbone of the Lebanese economy, and they constitute 90% of Lebanese businesses and 50% of the GDPs. Today, 60% of the Lebanese businesses are unable to resume operations without our help. So at Global Compact Network Lebanon, and under the leadership of Dr. Dima Jamali, we launched this initiative where we had our 250 members from the network. They are contributing in-kind resources and capabilities, and we are mapping and collecting the data, how to impact SMEs, and to put at the disposition the resources of our network. We are assessing the needs of each SME and prioritizing women-led SMEs. And we are addressing the results of the gathered data and alignment to the assessment of the private sector in our network. And this initiative, is with the collaboration of more than 150 companies from the private sector. And this is, it's worth mentioning that GCNL team has met and discussed, the intervention with the major coalitions in Lebanon to have a similar mission, because as we said, you have to work together. We believe in each other's in Lebanon, and we don't want to duplicate or reinvent the wheel. We believe for that connecting our SMEs with the private sector and multinational cooperations will provide them with the needed support and ensure that they have capacity to resume operations. As Dr. Rushdie said, we have to protect the Lebanese talent, ensure that they stay in Lebanon, give them opportunities to put back on their feet. This is very important. And also we have partners, like all the UN system initiatives, agencies, OCHA and CBI, to help us and train us after the blast of Beirut Blast. And really, I want to thank all our esteemed speakers, because we are running out of time, for their invaluable insight and for providing us a way forward. But to help build Beirut better, we need to address the current socioeconomic challenges, drive cooperative efforts that are based on actionable and measurable solutions. We need to help the SMEs and get back on their feet. We have Dr. Jamali with us back. Hello, Dima.
I'm sorry. Good. I had major technical through this session, but I'm very happy to be part of it. I hope you can hear me. I'm just going to say
Yes, but I just want to tell you, so because we have, only 2 minutes for your recommendations, I started a little bit telling them about the, our initiative. If you can give us your directions and your concluding remarks because of the end of the session, and give us the voice of the GCNL about the initiative in brief.
So very briefly, we're facing one of the worst crises in Lebanon. It's a multifaceted crisis, economic, social, environmental, health. It has taken a toll on every human being and on every business. Being a platform for the business sector, we're trying to rally business to support smaller businesses and SMEs. We have designed an intervention. We have reached out to the key players on the ground, and we're trying now to identify the best means of intervention to support those SMEs that need our help and our support at this critical time. I think more than ever, I want to say that the UN system should pull together to really support Lebanon to come out of this crisis. We require a rescue program that goes beyond even what GCNL is doing, beyond our Beirut relief initiative, and that really helps address the core issues that we're facing: corruption, a frail business sector, especially the small enterprises, micro enterprises, SMEs that are suffering. And we want to see real collaboration between the private sector, the NGOs, and civil society, and of course governmental institutions. I'm gonna leave it there. It was a great session. I apologize again for the technical.
Not at all. Your recommendations were really and I'm joining my voice on behalf of the Compact Network Lebanon to call on all our partners to come forward to help not only Beirut but also Lebanon to stand back on their feet. As the world moves from reflection to action, I'm inviting you to take clear steps and demonstrate bold leadership and dedication of action. As Henry Ford said, coming together is a beginning, staying together is a progress, but working together is success. I want to thank all the speakers, but before nearing the end of the session, we would like to provide you with a visual illustration of what happened to the SMEs in Beirut. Please double tap on the video so it expands. And we want to thank you for your kind attentions and your participation. Dr. Najat, Ole, Maisa, Sebastian, Namat, and Dima, thank you for this valuable session.
Thank you very much.
And this is the video. Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.
1 minute, please. 1 minute, please.
نحن كحرفي لبناني الاضرار يلي صارت لنا مش انه صارت لمحل وواجهه وحجر واغراض تغسلت، هي وراها ناس تنطر انه نحن نقدر نفعلها لحتى تعيش. نحن كحرفي لبناني الاضرار يلي صارت لنا مش انه صارت لمحل وواجهه وحجر واغراض تغسلت، هي وراها ناس تنطر انه نحن نقدر نفعلها لحتى تعيش. ما بدنا نوقف انه فريق العمل 6 منه تضرروا بيوتهم بعد 3 ايام كانوا نازلين وعم يساعدوا وعم يشتغلوا. تحية بقى. ما بدنا يقتلوا لنا العمل لانه هذا بعيد.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you so much. And definitely we'll be on the ground working all together. I want to thank the participation of all, globally, our friends and our network. See you all. Thank you so much.
Bye-bye.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Rushdie. Thank you, Maisa. Thank you, Sebastian.
Thank you so much. Thank you.